Welcome to the Clayton Tyner podcast, where I help you view current issues through the ancient wisdom of Scripture. This week, a remote Amazon village received internet access for the first time and almost instantly devolved into social media addiction, cultural tension, and generational disputes. What does this isolated experiment teach us about the broader human condition? The latest Star Wars Disney Plus show, The Acolyte, is receiving backlash for its heavy-handed approach to issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Critics have given the show a 91%, but audiences have it all the way down at 28%. Why does Disney continue tanking its marquee franchises? With immigration issues topping America's list of concerns for the 2024 election, President Biden has begun a crackdown on illegal border crossings. Will this help his electoral chances, or is it too little, too late? All that, and one look at Dr. Anthony Fauci's contentious time in front of Congress. Many are accusing the leader of the pandemic response of actively covering up the very research that may have led to the disaster in the first place. Is Fauci guilty, and what is his biggest problem coming up? Let's find out together on episode 65 of the Clayton Tyner podcast. All right, we made it. Episode 65. I want to thank you for continuing to rock with the podcast. And I want to encourage you to check out patreon.com/Clayton Tyner. This will help support the podcast and all that it takes to run it on the back end. It also brings you into a very cool community where we get together once a month. We do live Q&A where we all jump in a Google Meet and get to talk to each other. It's also exclusive content that comes out quarterly. So sign up. Again, that's patreon.com/Clayton Tyner. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Clayton Tyner. And Tyner is Tyner. A lot of people get that wrong. A lot of people assume there's an I in there, but it's not. It's Tyner. If you are new to the channel, what I do here is I try to take events happening out in the world and view them from a biblical perspective to the best of my ability. My real job is the lead pastor at Meta Church in San Antonio, Texas, where every week I get to start in scripture, exegete a text, try to apply it to our congregation. What I do on the podcast is kind of reverse engineer that. I try to pay attention to what's going on in the world and help us have a nuanced, helpful approach to it. So without further ado, let's get to our first 3 points. Our first story comes from the New York Post. It says a reclusive tribe in the Amazon finally got hooked up to the internet thanks to Elon Musk, which what they really mean by that is thanks to Elon Musk's company, which is called Starlink. And they finally received Starlink, and it says only to be torn apart by social media and pornography addiction, elders complain. Brazil's 2,000-member Marubo tribe has been left bitterly divided by the arrival of the Tesla founder's Starlink service 9 months ago, which connected the remote rainforest community along the Itui River to the web for the first time. When it arrived, everyone was happy, one of the elders told the New York Times. But now things have gotten worse. Young people have gotten lazy because of the internet. They're learning the ways of the white people. Wow. Oh, dude, those dang white people. If we would just, so what they really, I think, are trying to say is just the Western world. I don't know if it's uniquely a white person problem, but they're learning the ways of the white people. Here we go. It says the Marubo are a chaste tribe who even frown upon kissing in public. But Alfredo Marubo, it says all Marubo use the same last name, so that's convenient, said he is anxious that the arrival of the service, which delivers super fast internet to far-flung corners of the planet and has been billed as a game changer by Musk, could upend standards of decorum. Alfredo said many young Marubo men have been sharing pornography videos in group chats, and he has already observed more aggressive sexual behavior in some of them. We're worried that young people are going to want to try it, he said, of all of the degenerate things they've suddenly been exposed to on the screen. Everyone is so connected that sometimes they don't even talk to their own family. Starlink works by connecting antennas to 6,000 low-orbiting satellites. This is really, sometimes you look out and you see those stars that all look like they're in a line and people think aliens are coming. That's Starlink. The necessary antennas were donated to the tribe by American entrepreneur Allison Renault. Initially, the internet was heralded as a positive for the remote tribe, who were able to quickly contact authorities for help with emergencies, including potentially deadly snake bites. It's already already saved lives. Members are also able to share educational resources with friends and family. It has also opened up a world of possibilities for young Marubo, some of who have been unable to conceptualize what lies outside of their tribe. One teen told the Times they now dream of traveling the world. However, it also has downsides. It changed the routine so much that it was detrimental. In the village, if you don't hunt, fish, and plant, you don't eat. Some young people maintain our traditions. Another elder added. Others want to just spend the whole afternoon on their phones. Tribespeople became so addicted that Marubo leaders, fearing their history and culture, which is passed down orally, could be lost forever, they've now limited access to the internet for 2 hours each morning, 5 hours each evening, and all day Sundays. But parents still worry that the damage may already have been done. How did this happen so quickly? And what does this point towards in the human condition? Because I think we live with kind of this false anthropology that the West, post-Enlightenment, has taken that 500 years to develop into the kind of worldview and systems and ideologies and sexual proclivities and freedoms. And what this seems to show is that introducing the right tool at the right time can lead to many of the same detrimental behaviors that are plaguing Western society in the most remote, untouched people groups. I think this says something quite powerfully, and that there is something deep to the human condition where whatever we have access to, we can use those tools for good. They're saying, look, man, you get a snake bite, you can call someone, save lives, you can get educated, you can get a broader scope of the world, or we can use tools for evil. And it all comes down to intention. And unfortunately, without proper grounding and proper guidance, the human heart is a heart of rebellion. The human condition is one of rebellion. Technology is simply a tool that sinful hearts will often use for sinful reasons. Romans 3:10 says, as it is written, there is no one righteous, not even one. We are not naturally right. We are not naturally in right standing with God. The problem is, the more powerful the temptation is, the more vigilant we have to be. So if they introduced Coca-Cola into the Marubo tribe for the first time, caffeine has an addictive quality to it. People start drinking it. You get the sugar high. It does something to you physiologically. People would start drinking more of it. For sure, they would become less and less healthy. Now, if instead of Coca-Cola, you introduced cocaine into the Marubo tribe, the power of that substance so outpaces Coca-Cola that your problems would be exacerbated and they would happen much more quickly. Well, there are a few things as powerful as the technology on a Starlink-enabled smartphone. I mean, you have access to everything in the world. And unfortunately, because of the rebellious and sinful heart of man, one of the first things, especially the young men, are gravitating to is hardcore illicit pornography, and they're sharing it and they're texting it to each other and they're watching it, and they're becoming so addicted to this form of technology that they're not working. And the Marubo elders are saying, hey, this isn't actually the West. There's no welfare system here. You can't just take a month off and then still have some savings in the bank. If you don't hunt, if you don't fish, if you don't plant, if you don't gather, you don't eat. And so the society could actually collapse in an instance. This is like if we could go back in time, 400 years ago in the West and just hand everyone smartphones and see what happens. And I think we are seeing what would happen. In James, it lays out this great progression of how temptation leads ultimately to death. It says each person is tempted when they're drawn away and enticed by their own evil desire. And so is the smartphone evil in and of itself? No, but our desires are often evil, and the smartphone is filled with temptations. It's up to you whether or not you engage in those temptations. But after desire has conceived, so desire and temptation come together, what they produce is sin. It gives birth to sin. And then sin, when it's fully grown, gives birth to death. So sin may not kill you immediately, but if everyone becomes so addicted to their phones in the Marubo tribe that they quit hunting and quit fishing and quit planting and quit gathering, not only will there be cultural collapse, there will be actual starvation. I mean, they have no other options. There is no real safety net in the Amazon rainforest. And so we should see this and understand that it is only here in America and broadly in the West where we have a massive safety net, where we have so much affluence and so much convenience that we can, for all intents and purposes, become just as addicted to social media, just as addicted to illicit videos and images, just as obsessed with what's going on the different internet channels. We can do that and not die, actually die, or not lose our house, or not have to skip meals. The Marubo tribe is showing the actual danger of it. It's revealing what this technology is doing to us if we are not vigilant. At the same time, everyone can see how this could be a great tool for people in remote places and the benefit that it could offer them. But it's only a benefit if the tool is in the hands of someone who is guided and grounded in the correct direction. And so if you are a believer, then all the things that the world has to offer you, all of these different tools, all this different technology, the AI revolution, everything that's coming, those are tools that could be used for the gospel. The question is, will they be? And largely, it will be determined by whether or not you are grounded in the things of God, rooted in his word, close to the Holy Spirit, being guided by the Holy Spirit. If you are grounded and guided, then tools can be used for good and for the redemption of humanity. And if not, then they can overtake us. And there's a lot of temptation, and you have to check your desires. You will desire something. If you desire the things of God, then you will be able to avoid temptation, flee from temptation, scripture tells us. But if you are not grounded in your relationship with God, then your desires will be for evil. Desire and temptation will give birth to sin, and sin over time, maybe not right away, but when it is fully grown, sin will lead to death. Disney Plus has put out its newest Star Wars show called The Acolyte. Seems like there are so many of these Star Wars now, and Disney is like the franchise killer at this point. And so you had Marvel, which was just the MCU standalone movie studio, and it was murdering it. I mean, it did something building out the MCU across the first couple of phases that has never been done before, probably will never be done at that scale or level again, just the scale of significance and cultural impact. And then Disney, who has, all the money, was like, you know what? Let's buy it.
Wow.
Pixar, every single Pixar debuted at number one in the movie theaters. Every movie they put out from like their first 10 or 15 years, every single one of them. And Disney was like, you know what?
Wow.
Let's buy it, right? Then there's Star Wars, Lucasfilm. Obviously, just the cultural impact of Star Wars is massive. And pretty soon, Disney was like,
wow,
let's buy it, right? And so it's gobbled up these storied marquee franchises, and slowly but surely, it has murdered all of them. So Pixar, it's like number one hit, number one hit, number one hit, number one hit. And then the Disney influence over time, and I know Disney and Pixar, their connection was much earlier than these other ones, but the more it has become Disney saturated, the more it has led to its ruin. Star Wars, the last three that came out, the big movies, I mean, just tanked by critics, disappointed Star Wars fans. And then they go to the Disney Plus side and they're like, let's do 14,000 of these shows. And it's just too much. The Mandalorian was great and everybody was into it. And then it was just like 40 shows later, nobody can keep up. They're dull and they're dry. Now we have the newest, which is The Acolyte. The MCU, the same thing. It's like, let's do so many Marvel Disney Plus shows and nobody can keep up. On top of that, the messaging has become so overbearing and so direct. And by the messaging, I mean the message, like the culturally curated, politically correct messaging that is expected. And Disney has come out and said, we're not doing that anymore. But then a show like The Acolyte comes out and it's very obvious. The diversity, equity, inclusion, all the political touch points, they're heavy-handed, and even the actors and actresses, the writers and showrunners, they're coming out and acknowledging this, and the culture is acknowledging this. And it's not like they're apologizing for it. They're embracing it. Here's a couple of interviews that have gone viral over this last week.
I want to ask you both because this is, I would say, arguably the gayest Star Wars by a considerable margin. And Are you excited about that? Are you
Not the
bracing
gayest
yourself?
Star Wars. Not the
It's pretty gay. Let's be honest. Leslie, how do you feel?
Am I gay? Yes.
Well, no, I know
Yeah.
you are gay, but I'm asking, are you excited about putting this, this is going to be a talking point?
Is it going to be a talking point?
I'm sure so.
Because nerds are gay.
Well,
Yeah.
well, some nerds are very not gay and are very threatened by gay
Well, that's
stuff.
true. But
Yeah.
in my world, nerds are gay.
Okay. Was this the fun element of?
No, I don't think so. And yet people have told me that it's the gayest Star Wars, and I'm frankly
You're offended?
into it. No.
I think that Star Wars is so gay already.
Okay.
I mean, have you seen the fits? We'd be like, look how gay this is, and then send each other a reference.
And are you telling me with a straight face that C-3PO is straight?
They're a couple. That's what I think. But this is more outward.
I think it's canon that R2-D2 is a lesbian.
Oh,
Ooh.
interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
Ask Filoni. Okay.
So just to put it out there, I think part of the narrative that's coming out after the Acolyte received the 91% critic score and 28% audience score, which is kind of the kiss of death. Anytime you have a super high critic score and a super low audience score, what you know is that they're nailing it on the messaging, but they are not bringing the audiences along on the journey. And people do not want to be beat over the head with ideology in their cinematic experiences. They just don't. So that kiss of death, 91%, 28. Now the defenders are coming out and saying, oh, all of these, far right and conservative Christians and Star Wars, beta males and this, that, and the other, they're just making all of this up. But we're not, right? Because this isn't us saying this. This is the director just acknowledging this. Yeah, like I'm into this. This is what I did. This reflects my ideology. I am imbuing this series with my ideology. There was also a clip of the star actress on the show. She went on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, and this is how that went.
When people watch The Hate U Give, what do you want them to walk away with? Because I know everyone has a slightly different feeling.
Well, I mean, white people crying actually was the goal. It was the goal.
When people watch The Hate U Give,
We'll
what
see
do
that
you want
again.
them to walk away with? Because I know everyone has a slightly different feeling.
Well, I mean, white people crying actually was the goal.
There it is, dude. White people crying was the goal. Now that's tongue in cheek. I mean, I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt as much as I can there. But it's pointing at this issue. Like people are complaining and we're getting tanked and the critic scores are high, but the audience scores are like dead in the water. So, instead of like owning some of what we could have done better, we're just going to say, hey, this is what we're doing now. This is what Disney does now. We are a propagandizing mechanism for a very specific message. This isn't art. This isn't storytelling. This isn't introspective. This isn't a journey. This is a lesson. And we're going to teach you this lesson. And if it makes a certain demographic of the country upset, good. We want it to make them upset. If you point out that it is just obviously pushing an ideological agenda, we're going to laugh along with it because that is what we're doing. And it is what's killing franchises. And, this is made, obviously, like everything, into a right-left issue. Like, they're pushing leftist ideas and the people on the right aren't going to like it. But I think when you look at the actual box office, especially from the movies that have been released in the last several years, it's not just one part of the population in this very partisan fashion that's not showing up. It's across the spectrum. And I think it's actually much deeper than politics because, typically the left side of the political aisle owns most of the arts. They own most of Hollywood. And so the ideologies being pushed are left-leaning ideologies. But the same problem would exist if people on the right were using art as the same mechanism, because that's not how art is meant to function. And wherever you sit on the political spectrum, people don't like going into any kind of artistic medium and being preached at or shouted down or made to feel guilty or beat over the head with a message. See, the story in a movie or a novel, the story is the process. And the message ultimately is the purpose. And every art has a message it's trying to get across. But you invert those two things at your own peril. Disney has inverted those, and they've killed Pixar, and they've killed Marvel, and they've killed Star Wars. And I realize there's still, franchises that exist, but they're not profitable franchises anymore, and they are a shell of what they once were. And it's because they have made the story the purpose of the message. So the story now is the message. The character itself is the message. The plot line itself is the message. It's not inviting you in to learn the message on your own. It's beating you over the head with it. Even Jesus, while he was on earth, he used parables. It says in Matthew 13, Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But great storytelling always invites the audience in to discover a deeper truth, to go on the journey and put it together and really digest it, and to be enlightened through the process. Right? The story is the process, and the process, when it's done well, is enlightening and it's inspiring. And that's what the story does. But when the message becomes just didactic, when it becomes just expressed bluntly and with every aspect of the art to you, then it just becomes flat. Process and purpose flatten into the same thing. It's no longer an engaging experience. It's no longer an enlightening experience. You don't have to be enlightened. You're just beat over the head with whatever it is. Ideological storytelling chains the audience to the seat and then beats them over the head with a specific message and guilts them if they don't get it. If you don't like the message, then we go on The Daily Show and say, well, we made this to make white people cry. We love that. That's what we're trying to do here. We are a Disney Plus show specifically, aimed at, young adults to kids. And, we are pushing a very specific agenda in this show. And if you don't like it, you don't like it. The question to ask is whether or not the plot, the character development, the visuals and dialogue naturally enlighten you, or is all of that makes a movie, the plot, character development, visuals, and dialogue, is all of that secondary to this heavy-handed messaging? Because if it's secondary, then your character development doesn't really matter. Well, character development is what makes a story a story. It is what makes a movie worth watching. And when you're pushing a specific ideological agenda, it's not about the character developing and you learning by being able to kind of live through their experience of growth and tension and conflict and failure and rebuilding and ultimate triumph. Instead, that character exists to just teach you something very directly and without mistake. They will use their dialogue to say, like in one of the MCU shows where the new Captain America, who used to be Falcon, he gives this big speech. He ends the whole thing with a big speech where he goes, "Senator, you've got to do better." And then just lays out the agenda. Like, here's my ideological thing I'm pushing, and I'm just going to say it to you. Well, it's cheap. It cheapens the experience. And great art engages you and draws you in and is nuanced and is full, and you can bring it in and think about it for days and draw many conclusions and debate it. And two different people can sit through the same movie and come out with slightly different approaches on how to apply it to their life. That's not what Disney is doing anymore. They are buying up these marquee franchises and then using them as propagandistic vehicles for the messaging that they want to get out. And people are done with it. In Colossians 4, Paul says, "Let your speech always be gracious and seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person." And, this is more about the interpersonal life of believers, but it makes a great point that we have to know how to get our point across to audiences. We have to know how to get our point across to different people. And part of how you use artistic expression to get your point across is you take people on a journey. And the journey is that process. It is the art. It is the story, and utilizing every aspect of it artistically to bring people along and ultimately aim them towards the message you're trying to get them to, and trusting them enough that they can get to that conclusion. And part of what this new ideological storytelling does is it doesn't trust its audience. It at some level believes if we do not spoon feed you exactly the message that we want you to get, then you probably aren't going to get it. And we should allow art to speak for itself and to trust the audience and to make art that is compelling and enlightening and inspiring, no longer ideological. Biden has recently begun a crackdown of the southern border, and this has people asking if it's too little too late. A lot of people question whether or not this is really going to do anything to stem the tide of illegal border crossings. And it's very clearly in response to his fledgling poll numbers against former President Donald Trump. Trump obviously has been a stalwart, at least in his rhetoric, about illegal immigration and securing the border. And Biden has just been very divided on almost day one of his presidency. He reversed over 40 executive orders and things that had proved to be effective under Donald Trump. And we have seen in the last 3 years a wave of illegal immigration like we've never seen at any other time in our history. Most estimates say about 10 million people who have entered the country. And so now, as we're getting close to the election and immigration is a huge issue, it's towards the top of the list for most Americans. Economy is the very top of the list, but many people are concerned about this, especially in border states. He is beginning to crack down, and he's doing it in some ways that are like very much resembling some of Trump's former policies. So is this going to help him? Is this going to hurt him? Is it too little, too late? The New York Magazine has a really interesting perspective on this. It says, in a policy move that the White House has been telegraphing for a good while, on Tuesday, President Biden signed an executive order that will temporarily cap asylum requests at the U.S.-Mexico border in an effort to reduce the number of border crossings and neutralize a big 2024 campaign issue. As the Washington Post explains, it's a simple idea that could become pretty complex in practice. Basically, he is saying that as long as illegal border crossings remain above an average of 2,500 per day, then he will impose broad restrictions. A similar cap, accompanied by a major boost in border security funding, was the centerpiece of bipartisan legislative deal that Republicans repudiated early this year, reportedly on orders from Donald Trump. Now, to the Republicans' credit, one of the things they said is, we don't need this bill because as president, you can just take the same actions that Trump took and you can take care of this. And Biden and his team said, no, we can't do that. We have to have this bill. When the bill didn't pass and immigration was still a sore spot for the campaign, then Biden kind of showed his cards by saying, okay, I guess I can do some of this executive action, and in a way proved the Republicans right. The whole thing's a mess. I'm not sure anybody has the plan for border reform, but it says reportedly on orders from Donald Trump, who didn't want to give Biden a victory on his own signature issue. So this is supposed to be a stopgap. However, despite significant recent drops of border crossings, the cap is below what we've seen lately, about 3,700 per day. But the reaction to this new policy indicates that Biden may be in danger of falling between two stools, as has also been the case with his policies towards the war in Gaza. As Semaphore reports, progressive Democrats and some Latino activists are very unhappy. And here's where we get to where Biden seems, from his own base, to be splitting the baby. Progressive and Hispanic Democrats vented their frustration Monday night as they prepared for President Biden to unveil a far-reaching executive action. I think it's really disappointing, Congressional Progressive Caucus Chair Pramila Jayapal told Semaphore, adding that she'd been briefed on the new order's content ahead of its Tuesday signing. It plays into the idea that somehow harsh enforcement is going to work. Another, Greg Kasar, said we shouldn't fall into the trap that Republicans have set for us. It's going to not help the president politically because Fox News is never going to give him any credit. So what he's saying is that this article is saying it's not too little too late. It's actually too much too late.
Wow.
In other words, he's in trouble on both sides. Number one, this is correct. Republicans are saying this isn't going to do anything. I don't know if that's true or not, but they're making the case. This action, it's just window dressing. It's to help him in the campaign. It's not going to help him at all, actually. I mean, 2,500 a day, as long as it's under that, we don't even take any real action. I mean, that's a lot of people. 2,500 per day over the span of a year, that's a lot of people. So they're saying this is really nothing. So that's on the right. And then to his left, people are saying, how dare you? You're supposed to be like the kind, generous, loving, let people in, everyone gets asylum. And so he's splitting the baby. And the real issue is that Number one, it seems that he is having to admit at some level that Trump is somewhat right about border security. And so that's not good for his campaign. He's not getting any credit from the people to his right. And he has disappointed the people to his left. And what really happened here is as soon as he reversed those executive orders and people started pouring across the border, there was a problem. And problems require proactive action. Regardless of your political stance, the border is a very complex issue. If you pretend the border is not a complex issue, then you don't understand what's going on at the border. We need serious reform there. We need serious action taking. It's an issue of boundaries and compassion. And as Christians, we should have compassion. The word compassion in the New Testament is this word for like eating you alive inside. Our hearts should break for the people who genuinely are in difficult situations and looking for a better life. We should have a righteous anger towards those who are evil and who are taking advantage of those people who are in bad situations, the cartels and coyotes over in Mexico. Look, it's very complex. But when we're talking about this situation, just months from the election, Biden all of a sudden cracking down on the border. The real issue is a lack of proactive leadership. And because he was not proactive in his approach, he has created a lose-lose situation, or as the New York Magazine said, too much, too late. It was way too late. It was not proactive enough. If he would have done it proactively, the problem wouldn't have grown to this scale. But now that he's doing it too late, it's too much for the people on his left. It's too late for the people on his right. He has split the baby and he's in a lose-lose situation. There are great examples of people who in scripture were very proactive in their leadership and were blessed, and their nation was blessed because of it, and people who were reactive and who abdicated their responsibility. And if you are the president of the United States, it's a very complex issue, but you are responsible for keeping the borders of your country intact. If you don't have borders, you don't have a country. If you don't have a country, what are you the president of?
Wow.
So this was an abdication of responsibility, and now it's too much and too late. A great example of a proactive leader in the Old Testament is Nehemiah. Nehemiah went back to Judah. The walls and gates had been torn down when Babylon invaded, much earlier than this. And then Babylon was conquered by Assyria, and Nehemiah finds himself high up in the Assyrian kingdom. And he's like, can I go home and rebuild the nation? And he's given permission. In Nehemiah chapter 2, Nehemiah is back in Jerusalem, and he says, I said to them, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been burned. Come, let's rebuild Jerusalem's wall so that we will no longer be a disgrace. I told them how the gracious hand of my God had been on me and what the king had said to me. And they said, let's start rebuilding. And their hands were strengthened to do this good work. And because people were inspired by his proactive leadership, they rebuilt the walls of the city in 52 days. Now, that's a good thing, because in the ancient world, you would have walled cities, and that protected you from people who had nefarious intentions outside of your city. But it did something else. It sparked the heart of the people. And once the walls are rebuilt, this is when Ezra shows up and once again reads the law and the prophets to the people of Israel. And there is an actual revolution, spiritual revolution within the city. Proactive leadership always leads to good things, and it takes courage and it takes conviction and taking a stand, but people are attracted to that and they respond to that. And proactive leadership leads to other proactive steps as people follow your lead. There's an opposite example of someone who abdicated their responsibility, and that's the priest Eli. We read about this in 1 Samuel chapter 3. The Lord said to Samuel, I'm about to do something in Israel that will cause everyone who hears about it to shudder. On that day, I will carry out against Eli everything I said about his family from beginning to end. I told him, I'm going to judge his family forever because of the iniquity that Eli knows about. What is that iniquity? His sons are cursing God, and he has not stopped them. He knew about it. He knew there was a problem. He knew how God felt about it. And he abdicated his responsibility. He did not step up. He did not step in. And now disaster is coming. And abdication in leadership is a problem everywhere there is leadership. It's so tempting when you have the power and you have the position, if there is a real problem, even systemic problem that is plaguing you, to just push it off or postpone or blame others, to abdicate your role, to step up, be courageous, and do something about it. When a nation faces a systemic issue, people are drawn to whoever has a proactive solution to it. The number one thing Trump ran on was immigration the first time. And whether you like his rhetoric or hate his rhetoric, whether you think his prescriptions are good or terrible, he was very proactive in what he was going to do about it. There was a plan. You might think the plan is stupid. That's kind of beside the point I'm making. He had a plan, right? It was simple. It made sense to people. It got him elected the first time. And he is winning on the immigration issue by a wide margin because people respond to proactive plans. The same is actually true right now on the economy. By polling data, people trust Trump with the economy at a significantly higher margin than they do Joe Biden. And it's because all of Trump's rhetoric, which his rhetoric has been also a huge thorn in his side because he says whatever comes to his mind without any filter. But his prescriptions for fixing things are proactive prescriptions. And we should learn this as well because we all lead something. You lead something. If nothing else, you lead yourself. Are you leading yourself proactively? Are you proactive in your health? Are you proactive in your relationships? Or are there areas where we are abdicating our responsibility, waiting until disaster happens, then finally trying to find a fast fix and putting ourselves in a lose-lose situation? God has given us the capacity. He's given us the minds. He has given us the resources to be the proactive leaders who really make a difference. And we should take advantage of that. And now let's get to our last segment. Dr. Fauci was back in front of Congress. This whole thing has been quite a roller coaster. He's been in front of Congress many times. He has this epic feud with Senator Rand Paul, where Rand Paul is always grilling him and catching him in these little traps. And Rand Paul is a doctor as well, so he knows a lot more about this stuff than the average person like I do. And Fauci became the face of the pandemic response. And yet now, the more we learn about the pandemic response, the more we see that we were quite misguided. And I don't really blame anyone for being misguided early on this thing. It was so new and it really was so terrifying. They were talking about just millions of people dropping dead. Obviously, that didn't happen. And it just felt like we set some pathways in place and then we're too prideful to ever get off of them. In closed door testimony, it came out that some of the protocols, like 6-foot social distancing, that it didn't really have any controlled experimental backing behind it. It was based on studies from decades ago about how far droplets spread, even though COVID wasn't actually passing just through droplets. It was in the air. The efficacy of the masks, all that's been brought into question. Just this week, it has been determined that the COVID vaccine cannot be called a vaccine. Doesn't mean it didn't help some people, just means that it doesn't meet the definition of a vaccine. All of this craziness. And really what people are concerned about is that Fauci covered up the origins or the potential origins of where the virus started. They're concerned that Fauci committed perjury by lying in front of Congress multiple times, specifically about gain of function research. And so he is back in Congress. It's fireworks all over again. Let's look at this report from Politico. Anthony Fauci defends his COVID response, distances himself from advisor accused of misconduct. Anthony Fauci defended his handling of the pandemic in House testimony on Monday while seeking to distance himself from a longtime aide accused of misconduct. Fauci sought to refute allegations from Republicans on the House Select Subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic that he tried to suppress the theory that a lab accident in Wuhan, China caused the pandemic. He said that the idea is not a conspiracy theory and that he had kept an open mind about how the pandemic started. He has, however, endorsed a theory that the disease came from an infected animal. Fauci insisted that the research his agency funded at the Wuhan Institute could not have created COVID. In the past month, the Department of Health and Human Services has given proponents of the lab leak theory some ammunition ammunition by stripping EcoHealth Alliance, the U.S. research group that collaborated on virus studies with Wuhan, and its president, Peter Daszak, of federal funding. The department has threatened to permanently bar both the government grants, alleging they failed to comply with the oversight rules. Some people are even insisting that Fauci should be put in prison, which is a wild accusation, and maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. It seems like in the course of all of the contention around gain of function research, that on the back end, they kind of subtly, quietly changed the definition of gain of function so they could walk into testimony and say, no, here's our agreed upon definition, and it is slightly different than what we were doing in Wuhan, China.
Wow.
So all of this has everyone up in arms. There are some on the left who are in testimony really defending him, thanking him. Obviously, Fauci became a bit of a saint during the pandemic. I mean, you could buy the prayer candles with Fauci's face on them. He was a celebrity. He was voguing on the front of all these different magazines. What really is the Fauci problem? Part of the problem is that Fauci saw himself as of ultimate importance. And because there were significant mistakes made in the handling of COVID, what you would want is for someone to come out and go, hey, here's the mistakes that were made. We were wrong about this. Really sorry. Did our best here. Thought this was going to happen. Instead, like everything at the political level, everyone has to insulate themselves and never admit defeat. As soon as you admit defeat, you are handing over ammunition to people who want to destroy you. And so you just never apologize. You never admit defeat. And it might be good for you in your political career, but it's terrible for the general population that all of these people are there supposedly to serve. I think the real issue with Fauci comes down to pridefully assuming a position that was not meant for him. And he assumed that position because he did believe that he represented science to everyone else. And I don't just think that, I know that because he told us that.
Is that there's a distinct anti-science flavor to this. So if they get up and criticize science, nobody's going to know what they're talking about. But if they get up and really aim their bullets at Tony Fauci, well, people can recognize there's a person there, there's a face, there's a voice you can recognize, you see him on television. So it's easy to criticize, but they're really criticizing science because I represent science.
In the name of the Galactic Senate of the Republic, you're under arrest, Chancellor.
Are you threatening me, Master Jedi?
The Senate will decide your fate.
I am the Senate.
Not.
So this person on YouTube clipped in a little part of the Star Wars prequel where Palpatine says, I am the Senate. The same way that Fauci seemingly correlated himself with the science. The obvious problem with that is that you cannot personify science because science is a process. Science is not a thing. Science is not a proper noun. Science can't be a person, and science can't be represented by a person because that's assuming that that one person perfectly executes every hypothesis through the scientific process, which would, I guess, make them God. I don't know. Science is there to show us how we're wrong. I mean, you start the scientific process with some kind of hypothesis and you test it in some kind of controlled manner, really to find out how wrong am I about this? And the more you can find out by using the scientific process how wrong you are, the closer you can grow to being confident that you're right about something. As you adjust your hypothesis and you try it again, you have a controlled experiment again and again and again. During the pandemic, largely because of Dr. Fauci and others, we began talking about the science, not science as a process to discover where we're wrong so we can grow in our confidence about what we're right, about science as an entity, as a thing, almost as an institution. And Fauci became the science. And so when he spoke, science spoke. Well, that's a real problem because science does not speak. It just doesn't. Science is a process. And to personify science is a massive problem. But because we personified science, which is a leap in arrogance, it's like a professor saying, I am education. It's like, education is a process. It's growing and learning and maturing and being discipled. And I am education. It's like, okay, well then whatever this guy says is correct, right? I am science. And so as the representative of science, whatever he says goes. And we did not approach the pandemic response with any level of like epistemic humility. Like, here's what we think we know. Here's where we're kind of confident. We had to stand like we were sure on everything. When we rolled something out, we said, this will work. You have to wear your mask. If you don't, you're killing people. You know, it's like everything was so based in pride and based in a misplaced position. So why was a scientist the political leader of the pandemic? I think Fauci's biggest problem was pridefully assuming a position that was not meant for him. And I think this is partly Trump's fault as well, because Trump was the leader of the nation and he allowed Fauci and Deborah Birx and the CDC leaders and all of these people to really set agendas and to be the primary mouthpiece for what the response would be. And that's the leader's job. The leader is for the scientist to do science, to go through that process all day, every day, questioning hypothesis, running controlled experiments, getting closer and closer to the truth, and then the leader to come out and lead and stand on the convictions and lead with epistemic humility, say, this is where we think we're at. Here's what we're going to do. Here's the lessons we've learned. We were wrong about this last month. Here's what the data is showing us now. But we couldn't do any of that because the science would come up and would speak. We know this. It's a very famous verse, Proverbs 16:18. Pride comes before destruction, and an arrogant spirit comes before a fall. Pride is taking your power and using it in an exploitative way, exploiting your power. And it's hard to not say at some level when you are like voguing on the cover of magazines and people are praying to prayer candles with your face on them, and you are equating yourself with the science. And you have in interviews a massive portrait of yourself behind your desk. It's hard to not see that you have been engrossed in pride. And I think this is why Fauci is living a very difficult life right now. And he assumed a position of leadership that was abdicated to him at some level as well. We should be quick to acknowledge. And anytime you step into a position that isn't really yours, disaster always follows. And we see this. This is why Saul loses his kingdom ultimately in the Old Testament, because he steps in and offers the sacrifices that only the priest can offer. King Uzziah did the exact same thing, was cursed for it. Miriam and Aaron, they tried to usurp Moses' leadership, and Miriam got leprosy because of that. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, he was turned into a wild animal. Why? Because of his pride. He stood up and tried to take the place of God. Instead, Jesus said, the greatest among you will be your servant, and whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. In other words, the way up is down. And the way to come crashing down really, really quickly is to try and exploit your way up, to try and pridefully assume a position that was never meant for you. I think that is Fauci's biggest problem. And we'll see the legal implications of that, the social implications of that, the financial implications of that as these things play out. My guess is, like most celebrities and most politicians, nothing will happen to him.
Wow.
But his reputation certainly is hurt. And the way the pandemic was handled, largely under his and others' watch, has put the people in a position where not only are we not ready for the next pandemic, but no one will be willing to be led during that or through that. And that's probably not the best case scenario either. That's it for episode 65 of the Clayton Tyner podcast. I want to thank you guys so much for subscribing to the channel. I want to remind you that you can go to patreon.com/Clayton Tyner, support the show, get exclusive content, and a live monthly Q&A where we get to hang out. I love you guys. I'll see you on episode 66.